Welcome. In this lecture on NCERT Class 12 Biology, we would focus on environmental issues. With growing human population, we have witnessed that the need for resources have increased. Urbanization has increased, industrialization has increased, and this has put a tremendous pressure on the existing limited resources that we have. Now, when there is a huge pressure on the existing resources, this leads to a situation of turmoil. Now, this situation of turmoil would have deeper impacts onto various aspects. What can be those aspects? It could lead to pollution. What is pollution? Or a pollutant. Pollutant is nothing but anything which is undesirable and is present. So any undesirable presence is what is pollution. If it is in air, we call it air pollution. If it is in water, we call it water pollution. If it is in the solid, we call it as solid waste. Also, this pollution is one of the primary reasons for a negative impact on our environment, but there are other factors that are also responsible for it. For example, when we are needing places to build schools, colleges, hospitals, residences, what we are doing, we are cutting down the forest. So deforestation is one of the reasons. With deforestation, what happens? The amount of oxygen which is available to us declines because the trees are being cut, and trees produce oxygen, as we have already covered in our junior classes and that we have studied through the years. So that is one of the reasons. Now, also with higher number of resources, industries, vehicles on the road, a lot of pollution occurs. Now this exhaust which is going into the atmosphere would lead to heating of the earth. We call this phenomena as greenhouse effect. All these concepts we would be diving into detail, but this is just a broader perspective to understand why this chapter is so important and why we are studying this in greater depth. So this would lead to greenhouse effect. Now with rising temperatures, we are also leading to exhaust, release of unwanted substances into the atmosphere. For example, chlorofluorocarbon is one of those, and the CFC or chlorofluorocarbon affects the ozone layer, which leads to ozone depletion. So ozone depletion is another important thing that would be studied here, and ultimately it's the degradation of not one but all of the resources. So in this lecture, we would focus on all these aspects one by one. Air pollution is one of the major causes that has led to respiratory illness in most of the population. In the common words, we have understood that in metropolitans, in conurbations, what we have witnessed is rising amount of vehicular exhaust. Now these vehicular exhaust or pollution has led to a severe impact on the air quality. So we focus on AQI, which is air quality index, to monitor the quality of the air. Now also understand that this vehicle exhaust, when is going into the atmosphere, specifically during the winter months, this smoke combines with fog and gives smog, and this smog is highly detrimental because it reduces the visibility significantly, and as the visibility reduces significantly, what becomes important is that there are higher chances of road accidents that can be witnessed. So air pollution is not only having a negative impact onto our respiratory system, but it also affects the air quality, the quality of life in urban areas. Now, air pollution is one of the major issues. To combat this, what are the primary drivers for air pollution? We must understand that. So the first driver are the industries. The second important drivers are the traffic sources or the vehicular pollution. Now, whenever I talk about industries or traffic as one of the major pollutants, we need to understand that refining the air quality becomes important. So what are used here are electrostatic precipitators. Now, electrostatic precipitators are the concepts where you have the scrubber, and along with the scrubber there is an inlet for the dirty air to go in. Now this dirty air is purified here, and then there is a layer of lime or water, and finally there is a room for clean air to come out. Now how does this chamber works? That is really interesting. So we have, as you can see in this animation, there is the dirty air that moves in through the pre-filters, and then the sediments, the dust particles get accumulated on the collection plate. But let's see how. So what happens is there are the electrostatic plates. Now these plates actually give out the corona of electrons, and these electrons are negatively charged. What happens is the dust particle combine with these negatively charged electrons and they start to deposit on the positive plates, as you can see here. So these negatively charged electrons, they combine with the dust particle, and when the velocity of the air becomes slow as it reaches the region of plate, these dust particles get deposited onto the plate and the clean air pumps out. And this is how the electrostatic precipitators work. The functioning of electrostatic precipitator therefore becomes extremely important. And then, as we said, we have the scrubber here. So this scrubber actually removes the sulfur and other gases, and then we have the lime or the water layer which further cleans, and finally the clean air comes out. So that's how the cleaning of the air is done, specifically when you have the industrial units which are present and other units which are actually focusing on the cleansing of the air before the air is being released into the atmosphere. So this is one of the major important things that we need to understand in terms of air purification. But now note, the Air Pollution Amendment Act was there. However, in 1987, this was amended. Till 1987, it was only air which was part of this Amendment Act, but later on, noise was also included as part of it. So noise pollution also became a significant point of concern. Now, if the sounds, the noise is measured in decibel, if the sounds are more than 150 decibels, those could prove detrimental to ear and could lead to damage of the ear. Similarly, we need to understand that the regions which are close to hospital areas, school areas need to be honk-free zones. So honk-free zones are being developed. Those people who are working in industries where a lot of noise is being produced use sound muffs in order to protect the eardrums. And then also, we need to understand that there are certain limitations and guidelines being given by the government. For example, during the night time, there is a limit for the crackers to be burst, and beyond that time, the bursting of the crackers is not allowed. So, all those are in line with maintaining the green air, the green quality, and also focusing on the fact that the air pollution and the noise pollutions remain under control. So controlling air pollution and noise pollution is extremely important. So in this section we have talked about what is air pollution. Primarily, electrostatic precipitators are used and how these electrostatic precipitators function in combating the air pollution and cleaning the dirty air. Now, as we have already talked about air pollution, we would now focus on water pollution. But before that, let's understand that within the air pollution, CNG has been adopted in cities like Delhi. The adoption of CNG has been playing an important role in combating the air pollution in Delhi. One of the primary reasons for the same has been that with the use of CNG, we are able to reduce the amount of air pollution, but at the same time, transportation of CNG is actually difficult through the pipelines. Also, BS4 norms have been adopted, which are Bharat Stage 4 norms. So, BS4 norms and adoption of those have been an important indicator in controlling the air pollution. Now, we would focus on water pollution and how water pollution is detrimental to the aquatic animals. So when we talk about water pollution, what it is any undesirable substance which is present in the water and it deteriorates the quality of the water. So let's say we have an industry which is built up close to the region where you have water body. So what would happen? The discharge from this industry would go into the water body. Now when this discharge goes into the water body, what would happen? The proportion of the dissolved oxygen would reduce, but as you move away from the industry, so the water which is very close to the industry would have very less dissolved oxygen, but as we move away from the water which was closer to the industry, the water which is far from the industry, the amount of dissolved oxygen would again increase. But the region close to the water body to the industry, the water close to the industry would have a significantly high amount of biological oxygen demand. Now this is the demand level that you can see would jump up when it is closer to the industry, and this would decline as you move away from the industry. Now this biological oxygen demand is the demand by the organisms in the water close to the industries. What happens? The discharge comes onto the surface of the water. Now this discharge deposits as a surface. Now when this water becomes rich in nutrients, mainly nitrogen, sulfur, what would happen? A growth of algae would increase, and this would lead to algal blooms in this region. Now when you have algal blooms in this region, what would happen? The contact with the oxygen for the organisms in the water would cut, and as a result the plants underwater would start to decay and die. As a result, the fishes which are thriving on those animals would again decay and die. So what happens is, this contact when breaks, this increases the oxygen demand for the organisms which are struggling to get the oxygen in the region where there is algal bloom or higher amount of nutrients. So this is the area where the biological oxygen demand increases. So we say that biological oxygen demand works inversely with dissolved oxygen. So in the area where you see higher biological oxygen demand, in those areas the demand for the dissolved oxygen present would actually reduce, and this is detrimental for the aquatic life. So this is where we need to understand that water pollution, mainly driven by the industries, by the households located close to the water body, have been affecting the life of the aquatic organisms. The next important thing that we study under this is two important factors. One is biomagnification and the other is eutrophication. What is biomagnification? Biomagnification means with each trophic level, we have already talked about trophic levels in our previous class. So here we would understand that with each trophic level, we would have the concept that we would need to understand that with biomagnification, there is increase in the amount of pesticides which are present in the soil, in the water. So what happens? Let's talk about DDT. So DDT, let's say when it is present in water, let's say assume it's 0.003 parts per billion. Now, when it goes on to the phytoplanktons, it becomes 0.04. When it goes to the small fish, it becomes 0.5. To the big fish, let's say it becomes 2. And when this big fish is being eaten by a bird, let's say it becomes 25 parts per million. Now, this amount of DDT when present in the birds is significantly high, and as we mentioned, this is what is called as biomagnification. The amount of the pesticide increases with each trophic level. Now what would be the impact of it? Now this would affect the calcium metabolism. Now when the calcium metabolism in the fishes would be affected, what would be the impact? The impact would be the eggs of the fishes, of the birds. The eggs of the birds would have a very thin shell, and as a result there would be premature death of the chickens, and this would lead to declining population of the birds. We have also seen the same impact of biomagnification recently. In the recent studies we have seen about vulture. So vulture, there has been a significant decline in the population due to the medicine which is known as diclofenac. Now diclofenac is one of the medicines which is given as a painkiller. However, it has been restricted in use but still is being used, and the carcass of the vultures which have been found predominantly in northeast India, it has been witnessed that significantly higher amount of diclofenac has been found in those vultures. And this is again an indicator of biomagnification, because from one hierarchy to another, the organisms that consume that, they increase the amount of that substance in their body, and this is what is known as biomagnification. Related to biomagnification, we also study another term which is known as eutrophication. So what happens in eutrophication? There is a algal bloom and the layer gets covered by the organisms. Now once the layer is being covered by the organisms or the algae, it gets the contact with the surface. So the plants here start to decay because they don't get sufficient oxygen from the air. Since the plant start to die, the fishes start to die, and therefore we call this process as eutrophication. Now this process of eutrophication can occur as a natural process, but naturally it can take thousands of years to progress. But what happens with human activity? With the human activity, this process gets accelerated. Since this process gets accelerated or boomed up, we also call this process as a cultural eutrophication or a accelerated eutrophication. Now in this process, what happens? There is originally the water in the water body is relatively cold, but with the industry, the discharge coming in, this water becomes warm. Now when this water becomes warm, the aquatic life cannot survive in that region and starts to decay and die at a faster pace than it could have been, and this is what is known as accelerated or cultural eutrophication. Now again, since we have talked so much about water pollution, there is one important thing that we need to understand here is what is integrated wastewater management system. So integrated wastewater management system is one of the major concepts which has been done by the Humboldt State University in the regions of Akara. In the regions of Akara in the United States, it has been witnessed that the region close to the industries have seen a numerous wastewater going into the systems. So there have been two-step purification system. The first step of the purification is nothing but the conventional process. Now this conventional process includes what? Sedimentation, fluorination and chlorination. So running the chlorine and the fluorine in the water and sedimenting the water, so the water becomes pure at one level. Now this pure water moves into different hectares of land. So there are different segments of land, and here you have various algae, various fungi which are being left into these territories. So what they do is biologically they purify the water. So this process, this conventional process, won't remove any kind of heavy metals from the water, but with the use of these algae and fungi, these heavy metals could actually be removed from the system, and this process runs through what is known as the Friends of Akaran marsh, and the people here work together maintaining the regions and the aquatic system. Even these marshes have now turned into sanctuaries. So there have been various processes through which the process of integrated wastewater management actually works. So this was just one case study that we have discussed. We have numerous such interesting case studies where efforts have been taken to control the impact of water pollution, and the heavy metals being released into the water bodies can be controlled significantly. The next important topic is solid waste. So when we are focusing on solid waste, we need to understand solid waste can be in various forms. The most important is the landfills. So what happens is the waste is being dumped into the land, and that's what are known as landfills, as you can see here. Similarly, this waste can be household waste, this can be industrial waste, medical waste, but segregation of waste is very, very important. Now even at households, we are segregating waste as dry waste and wet waste. Wet waste can be turned into compost. However, dry waste can be either recycled or incinerated. Burning or incineration is one of the processes through which waste is actually tackled, but it does lead to air pollution. So we have to be very vigilant while doing that. Landfills is another process, but landfills also lead to hazardous air fumes, which can lead to corrosion of the air conditioning systems in and around the region. One of the regions in the regions close to Ahmedabad, which is known as Pirana, is one of the major dump sites. And there were studies which have shown that a region surrounding 10 kilometers of the region of Pirana have witnessed the corrosion of the copper wires of air conditioners. And that's one of the very important things that we need to understand. So solid waste and its management becomes an important thing. Now, there have been various studies and various efforts. One of those is what is known as polyblend. Now, polyblend is a technique where recycling of this plastic waste is being done, and this plastic waste is being purchased from the rag picker and then is being processed and is used with the bitumen, and that is used in laying down the roads. So this plastic waste is being utilized when construction of the roads are being done. So that's one of the ways through which solid waste management can be done. But management of the solid waste is specifically important. Also, segregation of the waste. For example, whether it is an electronic waste, whether it is a medical waste, whether it is a biodegradable waste which can be turned into a compost, or it is a non-biodegradable waste which cannot be turned into a compost. All of those things must be taken into account before we understand the concept of solid waste, and therefore each of the countries have been putting in their own efforts for the process of recycling, for the process of incineration, and trying to reduce the burden on environment through these solid waste. Recycling is one of the ways, and using plastics in road is one of the recent things that we have been doing and has turned out to be highly successful. So that was about understanding the solid waste and its impact onto the environment. The next is the concept of greenhouse. Now, before we understand the greenhouse effect, let's understand greenhouse first. So what happened during the winter month or in the cold areas? In the cold areas or in winter months, when there is no sufficient sunlight or heat, what happens? Greenhouse are created. Now these greenhouse become a shelter where crops can be cultivated. So what happens is the long wave radiations get in and the short wave radiations get out. So the difference of that is the heat, and this heat gets trapped into the greenhouse, which is the glass covering that we can see here. Now, as we said, these greenhouse are beneficial, but on the earth similar greenhouse effect acts. So what happens when there is a significant release of gas? It could be carbon dioxide, it could be nitrogen. This release of gas into the atmosphere leads to rising temperature. Now with the rising temperature, when you have the long waves radiation entering in and short wave radiations going out, the heat gets trapped into the earth, and this trapped heat increases the temperature of the earth. So the long wave radiations coming in, short wave radiations going out, and the remaining energy is getting trapped. Now, which are the gases that promote rapid greenhouse effect? So carbon dioxide, methane are some of the gases that actually promote rapid greenhouse effect or increase the temperature at a faster pace. But there are another important constituents. For example, even water vapor is considered as a greenhouse effect. The idea here is these gases, which is carbon dioxide or methane, are released into the atmosphere from industries, from vehicular exhaust, and they lead to rising temperature. Now with the rising temperature, it would have an impact on the climate. It would lead to climate change. El Nino, La Nina could be some of the phenomena that can be witnessed. So changing earth dynamic structure, we can say. And this would also have a more pressure on the resources, declining water table, scarcity of water. So all those would again put a pressure onto the environment. Similarly, with rising greenhouse, you would have global warming. Global warming would lead to melting of the glaciers. Melting of the glaciers would lead to increase in the water levels, which would lead to submergence of the ocean bodies, and therefore the small islands start to sink, and they are again detrimental. So there are various important things that we need to understand in light of this greenhouse effect, and once it is promoted, we understand that it would have a significant impact onto the various phenomena on the earth, and it would also lead to the rising temperatures onto the surface of the earth. Coming on to ozone. Now, ozone is an important gas. There are two important things. What is ozone? Ozone is technically O3, three molecules, three atoms of oxygen combined to form O3. Now, what happens is when we have the good or the bad ozone, we can say. So, what is bad ozone? If the ozone is present in the lower layers, which is troposphere, it is significantly harmful for human beings and could lead to even cancerous diseases. The second one is the good ozone. Good ozone is the one which is present in stratosphere. In the upper layers or in the stratosphere, when this ozone is present, it blocks the harmful ultraviolet rays B entering into the earth's surface. So this ultraviolet rays entering into the earth's surface are being blocked, and this reduces the impact of the harmful impact onto the organisms onto the surface. Now, if this harmful ultraviolet B radiation reaches the earth, what would happen? This could lead to various kinds of skin cancers, skin diseases. It could also lead to blindness. We call it as snow blindness because it has an impact onto the cornea, and there is the damage of the cornea that can be seen. So cornea in eye can be damaged, and this phenomena is what is known as snow blindness. So ozone depletion leads to snow blindness as well. Now, how do we measure the layer of ozone? The amount of ozone is measured in Dobson unit. We call it as DU. So that is the amount of measurement of the thickness of the ozone which is present. Now, with rising temperatures, we have seen that there are more exhausts which are being released. Chlorofluorocarbons is one such gases which was used in refrigeration and aerosols previously. Now it has been banned. So this CFC which was being used released the free chlorine radical. Now this free chlorine radical combines with ozone and it disintegrates into chlorine oxide and oxygen free radical. Now this oxygen free radical has a capability to move freely. So this ozone actually breaks down and has a significant impact. This has led to ozone hole in the region close to Antarctica, which is again one of the major causes of concern because it was witnessed that over the years this ozone hole is growing. Now with this issue that came into light that had an impact onto the ozone and Antarctica, which could lead to melting of the glaciers, it was believed that a protocol need to be brought into account, and as a result Montreal Protocol was brought into account. We have talked about two important protocols. One is the Kyoto Protocol, the other is the Montreal Protocol. Important to note, Montreal Protocol is for ozone and protection of ozone. So Montreal Protocol and its impact are extremely important. However, we have covered that in a separate lecture on 33 environmental conventions. So just follow that for more detail. Another important impact on environment is through soil erosion. There is one important thing which is known as waterlogging when there is excessive flooding. There is salinity issues, specifically in the region of Indira Gandhi Canal in Rajasthan. Rajasthan was predominantly a dry area, and with green revolution, it was believed that there could be drastic changes that could be brought in the region of Rajasthan as well, along with the regions of Punjab and Haryana, because this was one of the adjacent regions. So Indira Gandhi Canal was built to supply water to this region, but it led to waterlogging and salinity issues, and as a result the impact was terribly bad onto the soil there, and this led to declining quality of the soil there. So salinity and waterlogging are another important issues. And then there is rising impact of desertification. So deserts getting expanded. For example, the Thar desert is being blocked by Aravalli mountains. Now we have seen that the Aravallis are receding, they are old mountains. So what happened? These dunes are moving across the Aravallis, and it's believed that the desertification has expanded even beyond the Aravallis. So Aravallis act as a marker between the west and the the East Rajasthan. But this receding Aravallis or the gaps in the Aravallis have been one of the predominant reasons that desertification has expanded to the eastern part of Rajasthan as well. So those are some of the important concerns. Now besides that, deforestation, as we mentioned in the very beginning of our lecture, it's very important to understand that with rising industrialization, with rising urbanization, what we are doing, we are cutting down forests, we are cutting down trees. Now when we are cutting down forests, cutting down trees, we are having a significant impact onto the environment. Even in the northeast areas, there is activities which are known as slash and burn cultivation. So this slash and burn cultivation is nothing but what happens is the land parcel on which the agriculture is done is being cut and burned and being left fallow for 2 or 3 years and move on to the next patch of land, then move on to the next patch of land. In this duration, the first patch would recover and then you would come back and crop on the first patch of land. But this is a time consuming process, and keeping this land barren would also lead to erosion when there is, let's say, a huge amount of winds blowing in or flooding. Then the fertile soil would blow. This would have a negative impact onto the soil. So slash and burn, or what is also called as zooming cultivation in Northeast specifically, this term is used. So this has been restricted significantly. We also understand that deforestation is now to be controlled. So what is done is reforestation. We are focusing on planting more trees and more forests again. Now for reforestation, what is important? For reforestation, definitely the land that has been cleared cannot be made alive again. So what we are talking about are vertical gardens. We are talking about skyscrapers, and those skyscrapers would have vertical gardens. So vertical plantation is one of the things that are being done. Rooftop plantation is another thing which is taken into account. So by different ways, we are trying to bring back the nature closer to us. Now again, there had been a various interesting stories and movements, not in the recent but even in the past. One such is in North, which is known as the Chipko movement. Now this Chipko movement was a really interesting movement because this movement was started by Amrita Devi, who was a Bishnoi, and in name of whom Amrita Devi award is still given. So what happened? The king in that region asked to build a palace. Now to build that palace, it was required that the woods should be cut, the forest should be cleared. So they required wood in order to have the building being brought. So the soldiers went on to the region to clear the area, but these people started to hug the tree, and that's why the name Chipko. So they started to hug the tree and they said that if you want the wood, kill us first and then kill the trees. And this created a movement, a lively movement, which was known as Chipko movement. This Chipko movement was a popular movement in North India. Similar to it, we also had the Apiko movement in South India, which started. So those were some of the movements which were revolutionary in order to protect the forest, which are the lifeline of our existence. And then we also practice another techniques which are known as, let's say, joint forest management. Joint forest management is a technique which was introduced not very early, but it was somewhere around 1980s that this technique was introduced. So the idea is to protect the forest and manage the forest resources. So the community gets the forest products and the community protects the forest in turn of getting the forest product. So what kind of forest product? Minor forest product. It could be honey, it could be lark. So those small products which can be obtained from the forest are being utilized by the farmers, but at the same time farmers are ensuring that these forest areas are preserved. We call this as a joint forest management system, where both the farmers as well as the forest are living in coexistence and are able to protect one another. So in this section, we have talked about the various environmental issues and how these could be protected. One another important issue is the issue of agrochemicals and radioactive waste that we would cover in the next section. Now there are another types of waste which are agrochemical waste. Now these agrochemical waste are again important to study. Agrochemical waste actually are the chemicals which are released in the agricultural land. So these could be pesticides which are used to kill the pests. These could be fungicides which are used to kill the fungus. These could be fertilizers which are used to improve the fertility of the soil. All of those fall under the category of agrochemicals. Now these agrochemicals, when being discharged, lead to algal bloom in the water bodies, and therefore these agrochemicals have their own disadvantages that we have to bear. As a result, we are now progressing towards what is known as Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana, or what we call as the concept of organic farming. Now this organic farming is using the biodegradable waste, the compost, the cow dung, and is utilizing that for as fertilizers, as fungicide, as pesticide, and this would reduce the dependence on agrochemicals. Now there are two benefits out of it. First is these agrochemicals lead to higher level of pollution. So the amount of pollution would significantly decline. The second is India as a nation depends on various other nations for the import of these chemicals, which are mainly the NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. So we import the fertilizers in India. Now our import dependence would also reduce, and that would also make our country self-reliant. So there are multiple benefits of going organic, and if organic cultivation becomes successful, definitely it could be a game changer. The next is radioactive waste. Now radioactive waste, we have talked about two important tragedies. One is the 3 Mile Island, the another is the Chernobyl Island. The Chernobyl tragedy. Now Chernobyl was again in news in light of the Ukraine-Russia crisis. The idea behind understanding the radioactive waste is the radioactive waste, if they are exposed, they can lead to a tremendous impact onto the surrounding area. For example, when Chernobyl power plant was under threat, we have understood that a whole region under it became a no economy zone activity. So it was considered as a dead zone, and even that reactor was covered by a huge shield, and this shield had its own life because of the radioactive emissions. Shield started to decay in a period of 20 years, so there was another shield that had to be made on top of it. So these radioactive waste have their own limitations. Similarly, we have seen in the tsunami, there was an impact on the Fukushima nuclear reactor in Japan, and this was again a significant impact because the radioactive waste it was threatened that those waste would move into the water bodies and would have a significant impact on the aquatic life and the water ecosystem or the aquatic ecosystem. So there has to be a clear understanding that whenever radioactive components are being used, be it for energy generation, be it for power generation, we need to understand that these radioactive waste are significant threat to the environment. But again, there are two processes, fission and fusion. Fission is a process that uses uranium and produces thorium. However, fusion uses hydrogen and produces helium. But fusion reactions are relatively safer. There are no significant radioactive waste which are generated, and therefore fusion reactions are relatively considered as a green reaction. It only requires higher temperature that has to be maintained, but overall the products which are released from fusion reaction are relatively safer, and these fusion reactors are also under development and progress. Thank you.